Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Beyond the Fray, Bigfoot, by Shannon LeGros and G. Michael Hopf. Narrated by Tanya and Alex Knox. Introduction. I often get asked why I became so interested in the subject of Sasquatch. I really can't answer that question simply, as I can't trace it back to an exact time and place, but it's fair to say my fascination goes well beyond just that topic alone. I have what can only be described as a hunger to explore and uncover all the unknown, those not readily explained things that cohabitate with us, and for some, manifest before their eyes. This hunger for knowledge has taken me far and wide, from searching for Sasquatch across many states while filming the documentary On the Trail of Bigfoot, to investigating the notoriously haunted Fox Hollow Farm in Indiana and conducting research on Mothman in none other than Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I've chalked up many miles, have found some evidence, but uncovering definitive proof has eluded me. Yet I'll never tire or give up. As of the publication of this book, I've been hosting and producing the popular podcast Into the Fray since September of 2015. My show has two purposes. The first is to showcase experts and renowned researchers covering all topics in the paranormal and cryptid community. The second purpose, and one that I believe in my heart is the most important, is to provide a safe harbor for the many who have had encounters with such things as demons, Sasquatch, dogmen, shadow people, UFOs, you name it. On my show, they can open up and share their personal stories without judgment or fear of repercussion. For far too long, they have felt marginalized, outcast, ridiculed, and some harassed, simply because they have come up against something they can't explain. After mentioning all of this, I still haven't answered why I do what I do. Why have I dedicated my life to pursue these answers? Why do I tirelessly explore, knowing that I may never find the truth? To answer these questions, I'll need to take you back to when I was 12, and to the beautiful mountain setting surrounding Cedar Mountain in Duck Creek Village, Utah. My father had a cabin in Duck Creek Village, a tiny hamlet nestled near Bryan Head Ski Resort and 5 hours from our house in Las Vegas. If you're familiar with Duck Creek today, you'll know how quaint it is. Back then it was simply one very small general store, a bait shop, 6 little rental cabins, and a hotel that always seemed to be under construction. During this time in my life, we spent a considerable amount of time in Duck Creek. Our days would be filled with hiking, fishing, target practice with pellet guns, and one of my favorite pastimes as a kid, riding my four-wheeler. On most days, we could be found traversing the trails and dirt roads on our four-wheelers up until way past sundown. Just up from Duck Creek was a steep-graded dirt road that led to the privately owned cabins that sparsely dotted the landscape. The dirt roads crisscrossed the entire area, and with hardly any vehicle traffic to be concerned about, you could pretty much ride unencumbered. The particular day in question was bright and sunny. Not a cloud dotted the intensely blue sky, and the moderate temperature required only a light jacket. We would frequently ride without our helmets on. Not the brightest thing to do, but it was often the case. This day was no different. It was mid-morning, and my brother and stepbrother were riding in front of me a little ways, not because I couldn't keep up. Nope, it was because I hated getting dust in my eyes. To say we were going fast would be a lie. We were hauling ass. With the throttles of our machines opened up, we sped down a long and straight road we knew very well. This was living, and I loved it. I caught a glimpse of something to my right. I glanced over and saw something running parallel to me about 30 feet in the forest. I kept looking, and to my shock, saw 4 human-shaped black silhouetted figures. The sun was casting through the trees, yet its rays didn't affect these figures, as if the light couldn't or didn't reflect, or wasn't able to shine on them. It's hard to explain, but these 6-foot-tall figures are the only objects I've ever seen devoid of light. It was as if they were animated cutouts from the blackest cloth you could ever imagine. What was even more startling and frightful was these things kept pace with me. Their arms and legs moved with ease as they traversed through the forest without disturbing even a leaf or branch. Fear rose in me as I wondered if they'd look my way. Would they be faceless voids, similar to their bodies, or would I see a monstrous expression? I didn't want to know. And thankfully I didn't have to, as they kept their gaze ahead. I watched them for what I estimated to be a count of 5, but I'll say now it seemed like an eternity. I set my gaze back on the road in front of me to check my path of travel, then looked back, thinking they'd be there, but they were gone. As I sit and type this, being the investigator I am now, I wish I could say I slowed down, stopped, or went back, but I didn't. I pushed my machine as fast as it would go until I caught up with my brothers. When I reached them, I wasn't hysterical but was visibly upset. They knew something was wrong when I said I wanted to go back to the cabin. As kids, the cabin was a place to sleep, nothing more, as our lives were outdoors. My brief encounter not only affected my time there, as I didn't write again for almost a week, terrified of what I would see with a simple glance into the woods, it altered my life. Those 5 seconds changed my entire view of the world. I shared with my father what I had seen. He told me it was probably just military men conducting training exercises. Unless these men were outfitted with some sort of amazing technology for Superman-like running speed and a black-as-night starter kit, those were not men, military or otherwise. Those 5 seconds have been the only unexplained thing I've ever seen with my own eyes, and it is the reason I do this work. As scared as I was, it created this insane drive and questions. So many questions. What were they? Why were they there? Why did I see them when I did? It's too late for me to turn back. I'm in the hunt not just to find the answers to those questions, but all things unexplained. This takes me to this book. Some say the recent search for Sasquatch or Bigfoot officially began on September 21, 1958, when journalist Andrew Genzoli of the Humboldt Times featured a letter from a reader about loggers in Northern California. The reader stated that loggers had discovered mysterious, large footprints. Genzoli thought the letter fun, so he played along by stating in his column, which ran alongside the letter, "Maybe we have a relative of the abominable snowman of the Himalayas." What Genzoli didn't know, and to his surprise, was the letter would ignite an interest and fascination in readers. The response was so good that he and fellow Humboldt Times journalist Betty Allen published follow-up articles about the footprints. In one of those follow-up articles, they reported the name loggers had given the so-called creature whose tracks were becoming popular. That name was Bigfoot. While America became transfixed on Bigfoot in 1958, history shows us that talk of a creature or wild man living in the wilds of North America wasn't new. Native Americans, as well as early American settlers, long detailed stories and tales of hairy, giant, upright, human/ape-like beings living in the woods. In fact, many cultures around the world have such folklore. For as many cultures have their stories, they also have their own unique names for the creature, with one becoming renowned, and that name is Sasquatch. The name Sasquatch is taken from the Sta'alis people of Chehalis, a First Nation people whose territories are in British Columbia, Canada. Some in the modern age have described Sasquatch as a gentle creature, while others describe him as fierce and something to be feared. During my time conducting research and hosting my show, I have listened to many share their accounts. Some of these, while startling, provide evidence that Sasquatch can simply be curious and doesn't harm people, while others detail violent and threatening altercations. It is these particular stories I have compiled into this book for you to enjoy and use as a cautionary tale for when you journey into the woods. I want to thank you for being here. You're about to take an intense trip, one filled with terrifying personal eyewitness encounters with the elusive Bigfoot, so buckle up. And finally, to my loyal podcast listeners and fans, for years I've taken you into the fray. Together we've explored the unknown, the mysterious, the strange, and the bizarre. You have been my companions as we seek to find answers. Yet, if we never do, the journey itself has been the price of admission and well worth it. Now come with me as we again depart, but this time go beyond the fray. Chapter 1. Like many people who have had experiences with Sasquatch, David has been afraid to ever disclose, much less ever mention to family or friends, the terrifying encounter he had with the elusive creature, for fear of being mocked or ridiculed. David's encounter can only be described as terrifying. And as you hear his own words, you'll see this to be true. I'll finish with this. He had always wanted an encounter with Sasquatch and was willing to do anything to have it. But as you'll see, we should sometimes be careful what we ask for, because we just might get it.
Boundaries crossed. As a kid, I was always more interested in things like UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, things like that. Probably one of the biggest mistakes my mom ever made was giving me a copy of The Amityville Horror at a very young age, probably too young to have been appropriate reading. But regardless, that started my interest in all things paranormal. I remember watching a show when I was a little kid. I forget the exact name of it, but it was the first time I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film. As my young eyes watched the Sasquatch walk along the creek bed, I became hooked. From that point on, I studied whatever I could find, watched everything I could get my hands on, which was limited for a kid in the 1970s because the only resources were libraries and such. My passion for Bigfoot did have its limits, though, and eventually died out as I went into my teen years. In high school, I replaced the paranormal with music and whatever else was hip for the average teenager. However, as I entered my 20s, the interest in the mysterious and unknown rekindled in me. It was like an old friend whom you only see every now and then, but when you speak, you pick up right where you left off, no matter how long it's been. I have to admit that what helped usher back my keen awareness and curiosity was a coincidence, a chance meeting, a crossing of paths, to be more exact, with a gentleman who was pretty well known in the Bigfoot research community. He and I hit it off almost immediately, almost like we'd known each other our whole lives. While we had become friends, he also took on the role of a teacher or mentor of sorts. He taught me all he knew concerning Sasquatch, never leaving a detail out. We spent many hours in the woods, covering all that I needed to know about how to study and compile research. One thing that he told me, and I had no reason to believe otherwise, was that the creature was nothing more than a gentle giant, that it didn't mean us any harm. I'd read of a few encounters that had been described as violent, but I was led to believe that this was extremely rare. Sasquatch was merely a gentle, kind, and curious creature, a sweet denizen of the forest. I was told that as long as I was respectful, no harm would ever come to me. Well, I've since changed that opinion, and will detail the events that led up to my fateful day. It was 2001, and on an excursion into the woods, my mentor and I were out to research an area that was known by some to have a significant amount of activity. As we hiked back to one of the spots, we stopped to take a break. I pulled out a map. I always took topo maps with me. You can never be too careful when you're out in the wilderness. Seeing the map in my hands, he took it from me and, using a marker, circled an area that was only a couple of 100 yards off a particular trail that had been marked earlier. He gave me a serious look and said, "Don't ever go here." Not having seen him often with such a serious look, I replied, "All right, I won't." My curiosity was heightened, so I asked, "Why is that?" "Well," he replied, with a pause to gather his thoughts, "I believe this is where they live." I knew what that meant. The other areas were parts they roamed, hunted, etc. The circled area was their home, a place they could feel safe. I was still curious, so I asked him, "What makes you believe that?" "I've had a few encounters there, and they've all been with younger ones or juveniles." "All right, I will never go there," I said, although the desire to go was burning in me. Plus, I'm not a fan of being told I can't do something. He shot me a hard look, knowing I was a rebel at heart. "Okay, I'll never go there," I relented, as I picked up on his body language. However, deep down, I knew I was coming back, and that I'd have to do it alone. Upon returning home, I planned my trip back. Since I only lived 6 hours away, that made it easy, too. I told my wife I was going on a business trip, which wasn't a stretch, as I often did for my work. The morning came for my lone trek to the forbidden area. I remember the day like no other, In fact, I often can't get it out of my thoughts. It was fall, but the cool chill of autumn hadn't taken hold yet. My need to go outweighed my normal precautions for hiking and exploring the wilderness. I literally broke every rule as far as safety goes, with the biggest one being that I told no one where I was going, and I mean that. Not a soul knew. I arrived, parked my car, and set out on what I estimated would be a 45-minute to an hour hike to get to the area where I wasn't supposed to go. My plan for the day was to just go there and poke around a little, see what I could see. Essentially what I'm saying is I didn't even prepare for the hike and went without many items I normally take. I think I had a bottle of water, a couple of things to eat, light snacks, but nothing major. I arrived into the area, found a place to sit with a vantage point, and decided to just see what would happen. I recalled that I didn't see any signs, the things we usually look for while doing research. As time ticked away with nothing happening, I thought to myself, well, I'll hang out for a little while longer. I can't recall how much time went by, but enough without anything happening to get bored. I thought about leaving, but I couldn't because I had devoted my time to this, and because of the idea that if I stayed, I would finally get what I so wanted, and that was to see or experience Sasquatch firsthand. As it was fall, evening began to approach early. It was then that I decided to stay the night. I knew it would be scary, but I figured it was too late to walk out, so I settled in for the long night. My plan was to get up at the crack of dawn, hike back, and be home before anyone really missed me. I sat back and got as comfortable as I could. The weight of fatigue soon overwhelmed me, and before I knew it, I was asleep. Sounds of movement jogged me from my slumber. I lay there listening and straining to see. It wasn't pitch black, but dark to the point where you almost can't see your hand in front of your face. Again, I heard something moving. It sounded large, very large. Aside from the sounds of movement, the woods were eerily quiet. My body tensed as the movement grew closer and closer. Then, out of nowhere, what I can only describe as hellish screams came from the darkness. These were screams I'd never heard before, and they shook me to the core. The comparisons to a woman being killed are accurate to a point. What I wasn't prepared for was the sheer volume and forcefulness. More screams came. These were from a different part of the woods, then another. It seemed as if they were now coming from every direction except from behind me, and the only reason I could figure was because I had positioned myself against a steep hill and faced out. I had a flashlight, and as much as I wanted to turn it on, I didn't for a couple of reasons. First, I didn't want to see what was making this noise, and second, I didn't want whatever was making this noise to see me, even though I assumed they already had. My instinct was to get up and make a run for it. This was coupled by my thoughts screaming at me to do the very same thing. Using every ounce of courage I could muster, I got to my feet. My body was trembling uncontrollably, my breathing had increased, and my heart was pounding in my chest heavily. Still, the screams kept coming with ever-increasing intensity. I took 2 steps to my right, because only 15 feet ahead of me was the trail that would lead me out. Another scream bellowed from close in front of me. This time, I actually felt it, like the concussion you may feel from standing in front of a row of speakers at a concert. I froze. I couldn't even take one more step as fear gripped me. As my mind attempted to deal with the terror of the situation, I still managed to reason with myself, albeit barely. If I was going to survive, I needed to keep moving. I took a little sidestep, only to have the scream from whatever was close to me once more halt my escape. Whatever it wasn't going to let me go. I surrendered and dropped to my knees. I was surrounded now. Screams came from all directions. I plugged my ears and cried out, "I'm trying to go! I'm trying to go! I don't want to be here! I will go! I will go!" Suddenly, I remembered that no one knew where I was. I was alone, deep in the woods, surrounded by things that sounded like they wanted to kill me. and I had never told a soul where I was. It was then that I thought this had now become a life-or-death matter. Thoughts then came of how ironic my situation was. Friends of mine who made fun of me for being interested in this kind of topic, and even my own wife for that matter, thought it was a big joke. Now, the thing that everyone ridiculed as not being real was going to kill me, and no one was ever going to know. I curled up on the ground and prayed that somehow I could be saved. Time crawled by. What was probably a minute felt like an eternity. As the screams kept coming, I fired back with a pleading tone. "I want to get out of here! If you let me get out of here, I will go! I will go!" All I could figure was that my mentor had been correct. His advice sound as it pertained to this being their home, their safe place, and I was the invader. I really can't tell you how long I lay there, but finally I made up my mind that I needed to flee. But should I run? I thought. Everyone always says the worst thing you can do is run because you instantly become the prey, and they become the predator. There was also another reason not to just get up and sprint away in a panic, and that was the trail ran along some pretty steep gorges and was rocky. Just one poorly placed footfall, and I could trip and break a leg, or worse, fall to my death. Knowing I needed to do something, I began to crawl on my hands and knees. As I inched towards the trail, the screams kept coming. What's incredible is they had never stopped since they began. I could also hear movement, heavy movement of something big, very big, close to me in between the infrequent pauses of the screams. I was no longer deterred, though. If I was going to die, I'd at least die trying to get out of there. It took what felt like forever to cover the short distance to the side trail, then down it another 100 or so yards to the main trail. All the while, the screams and heavy movement kept sounding around me. When I reached the main trail, I was tempted to get up, turn on my flashlight, and sprint, but I resisted. I did, however, get to my feet and start to walk. I'm not ashamed to say that I was in tears. Actually, it was worse than that. I was sobbing, fearful that I'd never make it out. It was then that I felt the nip of cold in the air, as my clothes were drenched from sweat. I knew I had a solid 45-minute to an hour hike to go under ideal conditions from where I was, and that it would take even longer in the dark. With each footfall I took, I could hear that something was pacing me to either side, not 15 yards away. My mentor had taught me how to know if someone or something was pacing you. He said to stop abruptly and listen. No matter how closely something was trying to match your steps, they wouldn't be able to accurately time it, and hence would give themselves away. I did this a few times and confirmed without a doubt there was something out there. The screams eventually stopped, only to be replaced by something that I can only define as more creepy. The only way I can describe it is by saying it sounded like chattering. All around me I heard it. I got the impression they were talking back and forth while still following me. My head swiveled around frantically, looking to see if I could see one, not because I wanted to, no, only to make sure they hadn't finally decided to charge me. However, the dimly lit night and the thick trees prevented me from seeing anything. I finally reached the last portion of the trail. It was a steep and rocky slope that dead-ended into the parking lot. It was there that I ran. Down the hill I sprinted, without regard for my own safety, as I knew I was close, so very close to my car. I exploded out of the trailhead. Ahead of me was my car, just as I had left it. With my hands shaking uncontrollably, I managed to unlock the car, get inside, and start it. I put the car into gear and smashed my foot against the accelerator and tore out of the parking lot. As I drove to the hotel I had previously booked, all I could think was that I had survived. I couldn't stop crying. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I made it to the hotel, checked in, and went to my room. There I locked the door, closed the blinds, and continued to sob. I was a mixed bag of emotions and contradictions. I felt like a coward because all this time, after hours and hours in the woods doing research, after wanting nothing more than to have a real encounter, I got one. But the reality was different than the fantasy. I had made a foolish assumption, and it could have cost me my life. I didn't sleep well that night, as was expected, and the next morning when I drove the long 6 hours home, all I could think was that I had made an incredibly foolish mistake. One, I had assumed that Sasquatch couldn't be threatening. All I can say is that while I had made it out, had I remained there, things more than likely would have taken a violent turn. It was apparent they didn't want me there. They perceived me as a threat, and if I had been persistent, I could have ended up a missing person. I then thought of my kids. What if I hadn't returned? Would they have been plagued with the thought that I had abandoned them? I had made the biggest mistake of my life, and I regretted it. Many years have separated me from that moment deep in the woods alone at night, but the memory still lives in me so clear, so vivid, as if it happened just hours ago. It took me years to finally go back into the woods. Even now, I'm haunted if I do, always looking over my shoulder at any sound, no matter how faint. My thirst to have an encounter with Sasquatch has left me, I fear, permanently scarred. However, I do have to admit something that will sound odd, and that is, there have been a few times since then that I've contemplated being able to have another encounter. I know it sounds sick, but I quickly come back to my senses. To those of you who long for your chance to meet Sasquatch, and who believe the stories that they're nothing but peaceful and gentle creatures, know that I no longer hold that view. Yes, you can say they let me go that night, but if I had stayed, if I had resisted their display of power, how far would they have gone to expel me from their home? If my story doesn't cause you pause, and you're determined to go find these creatures, go prepared, and never go alone.
Chapter 2. A large number of stories I've heard come from hunters, which makes sense. These are people who spend a considerable amount of time in the woods, sometimes alone. Imagine being isolated when an animal unlike anything you've ever seen comes into view through your scope. This wouldn't be an ideal situation to be in. In this harrowing encounter, we'll hear from Chris. He'll show us that we can encounter Sasquatch at any age, and that it appears the creature seems to know what a rifle is.
2 hunters. It's hard to believe that it's been 29 years, but it has. I was 12, and for the first time I was being allowed to go deer hunting. This was meaningful, as I was now being considered a man in the family, someone who could put meat on the table, so to speak. The hunting trip took me to a 200-acre parcel my family owned in Wisconsin. There I'd be hunting with my father, uncle, and cousins. I was no stranger to the property, as I'd pretty much spent every summer of my childhood there. My cousin was just as excited about my first deer hunting trip as I was, so upon my arrival, he took me out to the woods to show me something unusual. He asked, "Want to see something weird?" I replied, "Yeah." He picked up a big stick, swung and whacked a tree hard. He repeated this several times. I wasn't sure what he was doing until I heard a whack sound in the distance. At first, I thought it was an echo. He handed me the stick and told me to try. Like him, I whacked the tree several times, then waited. Just like before, I got a response far off in the woods. I'll admit, I didn't know what any of that meant, and in some ways I thought it was kind of cool. My cousin then let out a yelp. Seconds later, something responded. Again, I didn't know what to think about any of what he'd showed me, and before long we went back towards the cabin. I was fascinated by what could be responding to our whacks and yelps. Unable to get the odd incident out of my mind, I went back out to the same spot later. I picked up the branch I'd used before, swung and whacked the tree. Like before, a response came back, but this time from a different part of the property, and closer. When I think back, I don't ever recall hearing about or knowing people who did tree knocks or vocalizations. It was apparent my cousin knew about it, but I was oblivious. Heck, I didn't even know what Bigfoot was at that time. Confused, I brought it up to my uncle, who was a man of few words. He simply told me to stop knocking on trees and mumble.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?